So welcome to Kenya Writes, which, as we've heard, is very popular because it makes sense to start at home this morning as Macondo is closing. So we are joined by 3 writers from Kenya. On this side, I never know my left from right, so just forgive me for that. On this side, we have Silas Nyanchwani, who has several books to his name. I have 2 copies here, 50 Memos to Men, Part 1 and 2. And you can get this and other copies of his books at the Prestige stand outside. But you do have an interesting biography, which I'm going to read partly. Before Nairobi women baptized him with fire, Nyanchwani was a fine and happy lad, mostly enjoying his beer or shots of whiskey and sharing his unsolicited opinion on social media. And then life and books happened. And on this side, I have Lutivini Majanja, who is a writer, and her most recent piece is in transition. It's called P Goes Quick. But there are plenty of other stories that she has written. Do try follow her on X or Twitter, whatever it calls itself. And recently she performed for Story Sosa. It was a story about home, which I particularly enjoyed. And we have Carey Baraka, who says he's from Kisumu, but somehow he's here. And he's written a lot of nonfiction, long-form reportage, but also working on a couple of novels, which he will tell us about. And you will notice something from this, and we had a joke about it recently when we were trying to prepare ourselves, about how 1 in the 3 Kenyan writers here have books. And I would want to talk about the publishing industry, your own experience with writing, your own experience with publishers locally and in other places. And I guess we could start with Silas about your experience with writing and publishing books.
Well, I don't know where to start exactly, but I started off as a journalist when I was a student at the University of Nairobi. And ideally, initially, I wanted to be like a novelist, but back in the 2000s, we didn't have so many people earning from their writing. So I opted to start from being a journalist, make a name, and then move into writing. And I think that plan has worked for me. And then essentially, I'm a self-published author, like so many young Kenyans who are doing that presently. Yeah.
What about you guys? How has it been? You've been in lots of journals, and also there are 2 notable publications local that they have been in. There is Ritual by DRR, who have a stand outside. So do get that because Lutivini has something in it. And also Asphyxia by DRR from May 2021, where Carey has something. But do tell us about what has been your writing journey and working with any publishers within the region or outside.
So I started working in publishing first, and I wound up doing everything that happens in publishing that isn't writing. And so then I left, and then I started writing. And my experience has been, as a short story writer, I've been sending out my work, and it takes a while, and then it gets published. And then I moved into nonfiction a few years ago, and well, it's been a positive experience in that sense.
I mean, obviously, like the bulk of like my publishing experience isn't with like Kenyan publications or Kenyan magazines or whatever. But years and years ago, I used to edit. Like a Kenyan magazine, which is interesting because you're operating in this industry where there is absolutely 0 governmental support. There is 0 finances. There's almost no existing infrastructure, and you have to like do everything by yourself, right? You have to like everything you set up by yourself. So it's like with the magazine or even like Silas publishing your book. It's sort of everything is down to you because there's like nothing existing for you, right? Yeah. So that's like I guess my experience with like Kenyan publishing, where it's tough that you have to do everything by yourself. Yeah.
And obviously that's very capital intensive, especially with, you've self-published, you were working with a magazine, you've also worked with a mainstream magazine that was Nyanchwani, which had its last edition around 2015. How is it putting in your own resources? What kind of support do you still get from any external partners? And then the other thing I was thinking about, does it mean that you are more in control of your creativity?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's the beauty of self-publishing. But of course, you really have like to marshal up resources from your friends. Like, for example, when I was publishing my first novel, I need to do like a run of almost 1,000 copies, which translates to almost $2,000 or $3,000. So I had to ask cash from my sister, from my cousin, so that I could publish that. And right.
Sorry.
Yeah, but now the beauty of it is that like my novel is really graphic, is really profane and quite vulgar. And I don't think whether it would have really, like if it went through the traditional, like mainstream publishers, I think there was going to be a lot of editorial censorship. So in a sense, there is that beauty that now you put everything out there that you want to put, and there's nobody who's trying to censor your work. But also now, there's also now the challenge of quality, what you put out there, because when my first novel came out, it had a lot of errors, which I think, had it gone through like the professional, the traditional way, that could have been avoided. We had to do like almost, I don't know, 5 like editions before we could get it right. Yeah.
What about you guys? How's the editorial process been and putting in money to your own things?
I would say, I guess writing in Kenya and wherever you're sending your work to, whether you're publishing it locally or outside, I think what Silas has talked about, you have to have the skill in everything, and sometimes it's just not your strength. So I would say, for example, I write. Editing is something I struggle with. So often, I think that becomes a challenge because it's not like you're sure that the thing you've written is so good that you can pay an editor to do it for you, to edit you. So then you sort of should change yourself in certain ways. You don't have the professional skill set to move the work forward. And yeah, that can be a challenge. The other thing I think is that there isn't the distribution of writing in Kenya isn't, it's not like selling toothpaste where, I go to the supermarket, there's an aisle, and this is where toothpaste is. And then there's 100 types of toothpaste, and I choose. And if I feel like, I can keep trying different toothpastes. Most of my work is online, and online just means that people stumble on it. Most of the time, they're not on purpose going to look for me. And it's not like a magazine, a print magazine, let's say like Parents Magazine, where even though I don't think that's true anymore, but every salon used to have it, so that people who don't care for the content, but are there for 3 hours, just have to read it, and then they're like, oh, I actually like this. I think being online has its downside in that sense. Yeah.
That's interesting, because the assumption is obviously there'd be a slightly bigger audience, but it depends on whether that audience actually interacts with that work. And Carey, you were saying that you haven't done much for, like Kenyan or local publishers. How has it been working with non-Kenyan publishers and writers? Is there a level of intervention that sometimes you're not too happy with? Do you feel like it fully represents who you are in the end when you look at the piece?
I guess like that depends on like the particular publication you're thinking about. So I've written like several things for The Guardian, and I think the last thing I wrote for them, which is about Ngui, we had an entire conversation about like how much we have to how much context you have to give whatever I'm writing. Because it's like this idea that like it's a British publication, right? It's not a Kenyan publication. So like the things which are like sort of like automatic to Kenyan audiences, it's like you say something about like, oh, there's independence, and there's Lejko, and there's like build that Kagia, and it's you don't have to like explain any of this. It's just like the basic stuff, right? And so like the sort of like debate we're having is that we have to, because it's a British audience, we have to contextualize some of these things, right? But then we can't contextualize like a lot of them, because if you start like to explain that like, okay, so Bilal Kagia was in KPU with Oginga Odinga, you have to say who Oginga Odinga is, you have to say what KPU is, right? And if you say what KPU is, you have to say what KANU is.
Yeah.
If you say what KANU is, you have to say what KADU is, right? And it becomes an entire maelstrom of just like, of the background information becomes so huge that it like, it's sort of like, it takes attention away from like what the story is about. So yeah, there's always like that sort of, that dance that you have to do of, you have to like give enough context that like the story makes sense to the readers, but it can't like give so much background information that it detracts away from like what you're writing, right? But like on the other hand, it's that like unhappy thing of, I mean, just like frankly, writing for whoever, like The Guardian, the New Books, whoever, it pays way more than writing for Kenyan publications. It's like, it's a market thing, you know, it's that like, if I'm writing for, I mean, I'm not writing for Daily Nation, but like friends I have who write for The Nation or friends I have who write for The Standard do say about like how much they're paid per story, or even people write for The Standard do say about like the last time they were paid a salary. It's because of that, like I have to like take okay, I'm going to have to contextualize in this way, and it's like, I would be happier if I was, because you know, like say like the money isn't just about like the money you're paid, but like the fact that they can afford to like pay for an editor, and they can afford to like pay for a fact checker, and you can have this really, really intense editorial process that you didn't have with like say a lot of like local publications.
Yeah, it feels very true. And it goes back to the fact that it's a big magazine, so it has those kinds of resources, and you would wish that you have more local international audiences reading that. But I want to touch on something else on that essay, because it caused quite a rave. One, because of where it was published. And then you picked a particular thing to share about it, which was how Carey explores, you know, ailment and the fact that Gogio's going through a divorce. And you've also talked about how your own book, which if there are any kids in the audience, do cover their ears. I mean, the title of the book, which I'd probably be saying, but do you feel on that note that there are certain things that are taboo to write about, things that you would avoid, things that would cause certain reactions for different people, for all of you across, that you hesitate to write about depending on the audience you have in mind? So we'll start with you. First, why did you react that way to that piece? And then on that.
So I think for the last 3 years, on my Facebook, I've been having these conversations with men. And that's the source of like the material for the books here, the 50 Memos to Men. And we don't have like a formal structure to talk about stuff like divorce, abuse in marriage, especially towards men, from women and all that. And I've had these conversations, like I've written over 200 memos on Facebook, and initially there was a lot of backlash because you write something and then women will be in the comment section talking about misogyny, and if you try like to defend yourself, men will tell you that you're being weak, you don't have to explain yourself to women. If you try to defend men, women also are asking like, what about us and all that. So there's been like a very healthy, sometimes extremely very toxic debate between men and women on social media, and there are topics that were really taboo in the past, but I think Kenya, we're quite free to air any kind of stuff that you want to talk about. The only problem we have is that we're still largely a very religious country. Like we have Islam and Christianity, but in our hearts we are also very secular. So like when I wrote my novel, for example, my biggest worry was like the vulgar or the pornographic aspects of it, but when it came out, the reception actually confounded me. Like I was actually surprised that there wasn't much backlash about it compared to, say, like David Mailu wrote a book I think in the 70s or 80s, after 4:30, it was censored, and nobody has tried to censor my book, and it's still selling. So we do have like a very healthy space where people can have these conversations, and I think nobody's trying to censor anyone. Yeah.
I guess it depends on reaction. What about you guys?
So, what's the question?
Taboo topics, especially as reactions to your essay about Ngugi.
Oh yeah, it's really fun. I wrote like 8,700 words, I think, and I mentioned the word divorce once, and that became like
the only thing.
I've been joking with Lutivini that like maybe that's what I should do from now on, right? Just like write whatever 1,000 words about awkward PB tech and then say alcoholism, and it's like yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was very fascinating how like that was like picked up. I think that story was like on Kenyans.co.ke and Tuko. Yeah. I've never been on Tuko. Yeah? It's like, and like I read like I think like some of the commentary, and like all these people are having arguments about like. It's like, oh, Ngugi has been abandoned by his wife. How dare Carey say this, right? And it's this thing of like, I mean, if I'm thinking gossip, it's like, who said he was abandoned, you know? But also, like, I think this idea of it being gossip as being a bad thing, you know? It's like, yeah. So I think the I guess actually. The right answer to your question is that like I've never felt that there's anything that is taboo to me. I mean, I think was it yesterday? Leila Bulera was saying something about when you're writing, you're always thinking that like, oh, my mother is going to read this, you know, my father is going to read this, right? So like I have like that thought. It's like, oh my God, my parents are going to read this. But even with that thought, they say like, you know, if it's interesting to me and if it's like important to me, then like I would write about it, you know?
I would say I don't think I've ever been stuck in any controversy. So that's why I was like, I don't know how to answer that question. But I think if something's, like I often feel that I'm writing the right thing when I'm slightly uncomfortable. That it means it's also pushing me out of what I think is okay. That if I'm uncomfortable, then I'm like, okay, this is good. I need to go on. Because it means it's asking a question of me, it's pushing me out of my regular self, whatever new voice that will become.
I think, just going back to you, one of the things that I do like about how you write about whether uncomfortable or awkward situations is just the humor and how it makes it so refreshing. So it could be the trauma of being in boarding school. It could be about your family members having been Quakers. And just tell me about the place of humor in your writing.
So I'm always surprised people laugh. Like I would say like one time I wrote something that it's not published, but it was really traumatizing. And then I shared it with somebody and they were really, really laughing. And I was so confused because I was like, no, I'm sharing my pain. I don't know why you're laughing. But I suppose it's probably, maybe that's how I process it. Like it's how I turn that thing from discomfort to a place where I can talk about it. And I think not as a Kenyan, like that sounds like I'm talking on behalf of all of you.
But you're in Kenya.
But I think to my experience of being in Kenya and living with the Kenya government that I have and the Kenya institutions that I have is that if you don't have a sense of humor, you will be swallowed up. And I think that just then shows up in my work.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think we cope with everything with humor. Do clap if you want. It's perfectly okay. And now still back to your writing. So you'd started off by doing, long Facebook posts, and then you had a newspaper article, and then you turned them into publication. Tell me about that journey.
So when I joined the University of Nairobi, like 16 years ago, we started.
Now we'll know your age. Start calculating backwards.
We started by writing letters to the editors, and sometimes you could write stuff that was so profound, and the editors would, down there, they'll say like, Silas Nyanchwani is a professor at the University of Nairobi, and I'm just a freshman who doesn't know even his way around town. And so for the longest time, I worked with both The Nation and then went to The Standard, where I became the staff writer. And I'm what in the newsroom they call like a lifestyle journalist. So you're writing stuff about bars, men, women, the city, and all that. And all along, like, I like writing like long form journalism, but in Kenya we don't have like a space for that. Like our newspapers, I think presently a feature at most is like 1,000 words. So when I went to do my master's in America, the training, like my training was basically narrative writing, like long form journalism, the kind of stuff that Carey has been writing in some of these publications. So eventually I got tired with the newsroom because you are being given this thing, like, I don't know, you have to do like 600 words, and some of us, we can't express ourselves with the 600 words. So that's why now I switched into writing. I wrote that novel. I wrote a book about Nairobi. It's called Man About Town, which is just a collection of my narrative essays, and I try to keep them as entertaining and as humorous as possible. So now I was able not to get that chance. Like, I could decide this essay can be like 2,000 words, this can be 4,000 words, as long as like I have enough meat for the story. So like for almost 12, 13 years I was in the newsroom, but now the last 3 years that I've been now working on my books. Yeah.
And Carey, you've been working on fiction. I think that's the thing that you, I would say, hold most dearly, but you've been identified by and large by your nonfiction in the long form. How does that, do you feel like sometimes it's in conflict, or does it enable you to then produce your fiction?
Oh man, people call me a journalist and I hate it. It's like, it's terrible,
Go away, some of us make a living from that.
Yeah, I guess there's this like joke I make with like some of my friends, but I mean, they're like writers of like long form and fiction. If you read and you just know this person wants to be like a fiction writer, and sort of there are all these people who like get success as like writers of like non-fictional journalism, and then like when they're like successful, they pivot, right? I think an example I think about is someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was like a struggling writer for years, and then started writing about like black identity for the Atlantic, and then it blew up, right? And he became like a huge writer, and became like Ta-Nehisi Coates. And then the moment he becomes like huge, he stops writing like the black stuff, and he starts now writing like, he has a novel, and he writes like comics for like, he wrote like a Black Panther comic, and it's like, this is what he really wanted to do, right? But initially, like, I mean, like, writing as a whole doesn't really pay, right? You don't like earn a lot of money from writing. But then like, especially fiction and like poetry doesn't pay at all, right? You can't be like, oh, I'm going to write like my poem and then I'll perform it at like archives and have a basket and people give me money. That would be really cool, actually. Yeah. And so I guess like, it's just like that thing of like the need to like pay rent drives you to like write like journalism and like long form like writing. And I mean, to be fair to it, like I do enjoy like writing nonfiction, but I particularly like enjoy writing nonfiction about fiction writers. It's like, oh, go and hang out with Ngugi, that is yes. Go and write like something very gossipy about Kwani, oh yes, yeah, but like, I mean, in an ideal world, I would be like writing way more fiction. But fiction is a whole other mess, because like, you can't quite publish like long form fiction, though you can do like long form non-fiction, and you have this entire structure with like agents and stuff, and I've had to like fire an agent, and I think I've answered your question.
I think so. And I think that the thing that I'm picking up overall is that it's such an uncertain industry, especially here in Kenya, and you have to do practical things because you have to pay bills and you have to survive and so on and so forth. How do you still ensure that there's a level of discipline to continue churning out work? So you have a number of books, you're constantly having a short story somewhere, you have a long form piece somewhere. What is your network like? Who's your accountability partner? How do you ensure daily or long-term discipline?
Oh, can I answer that first?
Sawa.
My accountability partner is Lutivini.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think I have this Carey, but there's also another circle of friends who I write along with. And so it's also positive in the sense that it doesn't then have to be published, that at least my friends saw it and they're also professional enough that they give me feedback, and I sort of have a commitment to keep producing, and that's very helpful. But I also just think what's helpful is sort of recognizing that some of the work that you make is just for practice, and it will be for practice. And I really like this quote by Kia Salimon, which is, we're not ever good enough to not practice. And that's sort of what keeps me going.
Yeah, I think for me, my family is on Facebook. And that's like, there's such a thing as an accountability partner, then it's my Facebook friends and Facebook followers. Pretty much that is my primary audience. And I've grown it organically over the years, especially the last 5 years. It's like multiplied like tenfold to almost 70,000 followers. And it keeps growing. There are men who follow me for my stuff on masculinity. But primarily I try to be like a humorist, like on Facebook. Like each day I have to think of an interesting anecdote, incident. So I don't want to be like this person who's taken too seriously, because when I write the memos to men, I'm now like that serious, grumpy uncle, castigating men. But now, like right now, I've like taken a break from that, and I'm trying now to go back to fiction. Like I think I've told men everything that I could tell them, so I want to create now another environment where I can write entertaining stuff, because I like writing about travel, food, and such. So I'm just now preparing my audience for that. So they are the people who dictate what I write the most, yeah. Because they are loving, they give you instant feedback, and they like the work. So it's so easy to share there, unlike on Twitter where you can, one wrong thing can send you like out of that space immediately, yeah.
And that's interesting, like how much of your own writing is based, like future writing is based on the reactions of your most previous piece of writing. Do you become self-conscious as a result of that? I think we can continue with you then, Mo.
Yeah, you have to be, sometimes you can really get into our heads and we forget, and the feedback from the public always tells you that we're working like those algorithms online. So you want to know what people like, and that's where you move towards. For example, my female readers have complained that maybe the way I write about women, sometimes some women are invisible to me and all that. And it's always good to factor that kind of feedback so that you are aware that you're not too much. In as much as whatever you're writing is about you, it's not always about you. You also have to factor in like the kind of feedback they're giving you. Yeah.
I'd say in relation to what you said about the algorithms online, you tell yourself you don't care that you got 3 likes. You really try to tell yourself you don't care, but you do. You start to question, maybe I didn't write this thing nicely, maybe my friends lied to me. And so there's obviously the next work you put out then has that at the back of your mind. But the other thing, I'm forgetting, I lost my train of thought, is that I really try to be honor my curiosity. So that's I guess something that it took me a long while to do, that just to be, okay, you're curious about birds, okay, then write about birds, even though you don't know anything, And sometimes what happens is then readers really get into that thing that you're curious about, but you're no longer curious. You're just like, I learned, and then I never want to do that again. And I think that's usually, like, for me, the fight I have with myself. Like, am I not curious anymore, or am I just tired? Like, or am I being lazy? Like one of those all those things together now play in my head. Yeah. Have I?
Yeah, and it's interesting that like Lutivini says that because the thing about like you get curiosity about a topic and then sort of your readers expect you to like have that constant curiosity. It keeps on like happening to me. There's a time I used to write about food. I wrote like a series of things about food, but then like I fell out of love of writing. Oh, is it off? Oh, I have to say all that again. Okay. Yeah, I was just saying the thing that Lutivini said about like you have curiosities and your readers expect you to have that curiosity constantly, but then you stop being curious. You stop being that interested in like one thing. I used to write about food, and I wrote like a series of things about like I think mtura and jahe and a few other things, and I started hating writing about food. I really, at some point, just like I don't want to ever write about food. And
now you just cook for writers.
And I mean, people still ask me to write about food. I think someone offered me some publication, a food publication offered me a job as a staff writer, and it was just like I really hate writing about food. You know, yeah. So it's interesting whenever like that happens. You have like an interest, and then at some point, it's just like, oh no, like never again. I'm just going to like write about something else now.
And I'd love to bring everyone else into this conversation because it's been quite exhilarating. So any questions that anyone has about writing, about what they've been writing, any clarification or anything? I think the mic is going round. There's one here. And there's one here as well.
Should I stand?
Yes, I mean, okay. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, I'm comfortable standing.
Okay.
In the anatomic position. Anyway, so my question goes to all the writers, but I am particularly exhilarated. I've met Silas. We have written in the same platform for a while, so I'm happy to have met you today. So how is the creative process for you guys? How do you practice? Like, do you have a sort of people who teach you strong sentence writing, or is it something you just have to go to the best writers, read about them, get the way they use their sentences, the way they use their metaphors? How is it like for you? How is the process of practicing itself? How is it for you?
Anyone can take
I can start, so I can be the least interesting. First, it's reading. In fact, when I'm not reading, I find it hard to write. And when I'm reading, it's just stuff that I enjoy. But I did take some writing classes, and I think that was very helpful for me. Some people just grow by practicing in their houses without ever taking an online class or a physical class, and I think that's also valid. Yeah, so that's, at least in terms of one of the things that has been, I guess, is something I still am growing towards, is developing my own sensibility. I think initially you write like the people you read. I mean, that's your influence, right? And the voices you hear in your neighborhood or whatever. But then at some point, I think you have to now become your own self. And that's what I do.
Well, I think the rules are always the same. It's all about the kind of books that you read and what you want to write. For example, I like observing things and writing about that. And back in school, I trained that if you want to appeal to people, if you want your writing to be appealing, you have to appeal to the five senses, and you have to make people see, smell, feel, and all that. And I was lucky to have gone through the hands of some of the best professors, both at the University of Nairobi and where I studied when I was abroad. So there are parts that you've been trained on, so that you know how to control the narrative and all that. But much of the practice comes from reading and writing consistently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like the same, reading and writing constantly. I'm always like, whenever I start to write a new essay, I mean, so like the things I write, which is just for me, and like they don't go anywhere, right? But then the things which are like more public facing, right? So whenever I start to write an essay, I look at like other essays by other people who like did like similar things, and it's like if that person like did this, then like I can do it like in the same way. I think a person used to like do that for a lot was Pasilelo Kantai. Like he has all this essay like, and I think it's sad like how very unappreciated he is in Kenya. But like he has all these essays that I would be like, okay, I'm writing about this, and like he did this in his first paragraph. He opens with like a sort of like a wide scene of like a city. So I'm going to like open the wide scene of a city. So it's like, yeah, like reading other people is like the way that I practice my creativity.
Hello, thank you for this wonderful session. It's really, really lovely to hear the insights. My question is tied to the gentleman before me. Oh, Alea is my name. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the creative process when you're talking about, specific pieces, so less wide scale, but how has your creative process evolved from the research element to structure to finding voice? Are there things that you've learned about the way you work that you would be willing to share?
I'll talk about my fiction. So most of my fiction draws from, I'll be thinking about, let's say, a specific object or an incident, and the story will grow from there. And often within my first draft, I'm very, I have to allow myself to write very badly. In fact, when I'm not writing fiction, I know it's because I have now become a perfectionist who's overthinking the process. And often, a specific piece. So I wrote a piece 2 years ago, I think, that was about, it's called Boots on the Ground. And I was honestly obsessing about Mahabharat, which I really liked in primary school. And then at some point, because we moved where I lived, I couldn't continue watching it just because my commute had changed. And I really also liked the voice of that narrator. Like if you go online, it's on YouTube, just in case you go online and you can listen to the narrator. And he speaks in a language that I don't know, but the subtitles were there, at least the one that showed on KBC TV. I'm now announcing how old I am. And what would happen is that when you're watching it, you would lose, his voice was so comforting to me that you would lose a sense of the need to read the subtitles. And the way Mahabharat, at least as I watch it as a child, is that if you missed one episode, you sort of felt lost because there were so many characters. Anyway, I really wanted to mimic that when I was writing that short story. I wanted the comforting narrator and I wanted multiple characters. And in that sense, that's what I used as my anchor to write that short story. Yes, and one of my characters was rushing home to watch Mahabharat, yes. So.
Yeah, I think for me, it all depends on what I'm writing about. For example, if I'm writing about men or stuff to do with masculinity, I always collect stuff from my fellow male friends. When you're in a bus, someone might say something that is so profound, and I'm like, that sounds like something that I should write about. I do have a few friends that I'll throw the question to, and then they'll give me the answers, and then I can see how I can incorporate that into my writing. But now for my other writing, like fiction and all that, I think the story cooks in the head for some time. Like if I was to give briefly the background of my novel, I was teaching a creative writing masterclass, and then I was teaching my students how to write good introductions, and then I was giving them different types of introductions. And so one of the best way to introduce a story is just to shock the reader. Like when they're reading the first line, they're like, how does someone even think something like that? And while I was commuting now to the class, I just wrote down a few introduction, and then I had this introduction. I felt like it was good, but it was a bit vulgar. I couldn't share with my students. And I felt like I'm not going to waste this introduction. And so I wanted to write like a short story, like an erotica thing about a one-night stand in Nairobi. Like a man goes to a bar, picks a girl, they go home, and but then as I was thinking about that, the more I thought about it, I ran into a former classmate from the University of Nairobi who's now a DO, or they call now like a county, I don't know, an assistant county commissioner. And he told me of a case he had arbitrated where some lady had sued two men, an engineer and a pilot for child support. And now in my short story, I had a divorced man who goes out and gets a woman in a bar. And so I felt like that can be a good background to why this man is being divorced. Maybe he's discovered that one of his children is not his. And now that's how the story came to be. So it's always something that is taking place in your head. You're just cooking, and then you're moving these pieces, and then sometimes you're lucky, you find something, you add on to it, and it builds and it becomes a story. And sometimes it's something that someone tells you, and there are people who are very good storytellers, but they're not writers. So you'll meet somewhere, they'll tell you something, and then you can personalize, or you can actually plagiarize their story, and now you own it as the owner of that story. And some of our friends don't mind when you do that. They tell you, I have this story, they share with us, and then we just put it out there. So the only thing you have to do now is to find the best way to tell this story, to think of what would be the best voice for this. Should I write it as in the first person, in the second person, the third person? And also now what you're trained in class, now you have to think of the stylistic devices that you want to incorporate into it. You can use some bit of flashbacks, some bit of gossip. So all those things now, what you're trained now, you can see how you can work them into a story. And each story will require different ways and different approaches. Yeah.
And then I guess how it works for me is that let me just say I'm really jealous of people who are storytellers. People who are just it's a natural storyteller. A, then B, then C, then D, then D, E up. And I've never been able to do that. And it's, when Silas was talking about friends who are storytellers, it's that feeling of, I was in high school with this dude called Masake. And Masake would do the voices, and his face would change, and it's it was so cool. Anyway, how I write, things I write is that I'm a very compulsive note taker. I take a lot of notes, I take too many notes. And so for instance, they said about Ngugi, the process behind that is that you start by obviously you have to read all of Ngugi's books, right? And then you talk to all these academics or whatever who are experts on Ngugi. And all this time just taking all these notes, just pages upon pages upon pages upon pages of notes, right? And then of course I went to his house, and we spent 3.5 days together, and all our conversations for 3.5 days, I'm just taking notes upon notes upon notes upon notes. And then there's a guy called Peter Nazareth who is a Ugandan writer, or who was a Ugandan writer, who is a writer who was born in Uganda. I think that's the most accurate way of putting it. I don't know if he'd call himself Ugandan writer. Who was in Macondo with Ngugi and has known Ngugi for 60 years. So I went to hang out with him in his house, and we talked again for days. So just have all these notes from people who have known Ngugi, people who are experts on Ngugi, and from Ngugi himself. And then from then on, it's now a process of thinking about what writers have done similar things to what I want to do. So there's a writer called John Jeremiah Sullivan who profiled Bunny Wailer for GQ in 2004, and I really like that profile. So him, and then Janet Malcolm, who wrote a profile of David Sale for The New Yorker in 1991. And Jeremiah Sullivan spent 4 hours or 5 hours with Bunny Wailer, and then But like the importance of what he did is that like to like talk about like any of these like reggae musicians like Banuela or Bob Marley, there's a lot of like political context which is very important because like a lot of like their music is very political. So it's like if like say Vybz Kartel is in jail, why is he in jail? What is like the greater like context, right? So I think my editor and I used to like talk about like how much context Jeremiah Sullivan supplies about like Banuel and about like Jamaica and about like Kingston in 1975 and about like, you know, the communists and like the capitalists in Jamaica. And at the same time, like Janet Malcolm, her essay, it's called 41 False Starts. So it's basically like, she starts writing the story 41 different times, and that's the whole story, right? So the idea that like, okay, I have Ngugi and I have like a lot of material. How do we like make it work into like one story? Because like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just like have like one free-flowing story. So like, yeah. And then after that, like writing like a draft, and I'm always, when Silas was talking about like, I think what counts in Kenyan magazines, newspapers, when people tell me about like, oh, they wrote like a long feature for like 1,500 words, I'm like, that's my introduction. Like, that's just like setting up the scene, you know? I have to talk about the clouds and like what the air smells like, right? So my editor asked for like 5,000 words for like the first draft. I sent him 13,000 words. And so like from then it's just like a process of like sort of like, not quite, you know, the aim is not to cut things, but to remove like the weaker elements and to strengthen the stronger elements. But all the same time going back to like, okay, Jeremiah Sullivan does this and Janet Malcolm does this. How can we do like the same thing in this essay? Yeah.
I can see 3 more questions. So do we start here? Oh, yeah, here, yes. I think it's not on. Just.
Hi, my name is Eddie. I won't stand because I'm shy. But as a groupie, short of calling myself a groupie, I'm a big fan of all your different works. I have a question. Silas had mentioned something about, writing what you want, and most writers are told, write what you know, or write for yourself, or, just write the story that you've never read. So my question is, do you go to the audience, or do you wait for the audience to come to you? And lastly, not to be greedy, what sense of personal responsibility do you have over your writing? I ask this because Carey's story, obviously, Ngugi's took a wildly different turn, and Silas as well, you mentioned that when you write your stories on Facebook, people just take the context and come up with something else. So you as writers, as different writers, how much responsibility do you ascribe personally to your own works?
So I think we'll take the next ones, and I'll just note them down, and then we can do, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Magdalene. Silas, I'm your follower on Facebook and a very big fan of your work. And for Carey, I think I am happy that I can finally put the face and the voice to your words. I read the piece. So I think it's just a follow-up to what he has mentioned, that when you follow your curiosity, and sometimes you do come up with very dangerous ideas that might even scare you. So in writing for platforms like Facebook, where the feedback is sort of instant, so how do you handle that feedback, whether positive or even when they critique your work? Thank you.
My name is Wangare, and I'm lucky that I've also interacted with most of your works. My question would be maybe to Carey and to Nyanchwani, because I think I've read most of Lutivini's work, and it's quite palatable. My question is, do people sometimes confuse your work to be representing you? And maybe this actually goes to Nyanchwani, because, and I ask this because a few years ago, I was helping in a particular show, and it was a family show. And this family came, and one of the children refused to get into the event. And he asked, why are you not coming in? And it was a storytelling show, and this boy said, it was about around 12, and he said, the last time I came, that guy who is, like telling stories, told the story of Tekayo, who was eating children's hearts. And I think it was so convincing that he believed if he went in there, his heart would be eaten. And I can tell you for the whole 1 hour, his family went in, he didn't go, he stayed at the reception area. So do you sometimes feel that people, take you to represent your work? Like, you say this, so this must be you. And how do you handle that?
Hi, my name is Nyambura, and I have a newsletter where I talk about books. It's called 100onbooks.substack.com. That's a plan.
I'm actually a fan of that newsletter, so
Thank you.
subscribe.
This question is for everyone on the panel because all of you have talked about your work being online. How do you deal with the ephemerality of online platforms? The fact that Facebook feels so permanent right now, but might not be around in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And all of us who are MySpace girlies, please, thank you, know that we put a lot of our lives and our time into those platforms and now they no longer exist. So how do you grapple with the ephemerality of online platforms?
And then one more there.
Hello, how are you? My name is Sam. My question goes to Silas. You touched a little bit about plagiarism. And what I know, your posts that you post on social media, they are not protected under Kenyan law because I've not come across any Kenyan law that protects creative works for writers on social media. So, have you encountered any incident where someone plagiarizes your work, and how have you dealt with it? Because I've read Baraka's articles; they are protected because the media platform that he shares is protected. So, how have you dealt with such a case?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we'll start with these ones and to the general questions about how do you deal with audiences and do you take personal responsibility for your writing? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I think I'll go first. And there's like I think Lutivini was talking about like this, like the algorithm, and how like it's like you see like, oh, I got like 3 likes or like 4 likes, and you're supposed to pretend that like you don't care, but you actually care. And there's a terrible thing about social media, where, at least for me, like my mind tends to filter out the positive things, the like good things, and like you remember like, oh, Mukomo and Ngugi said this, right? And so like because of that, because like you're aware, because I'm aware that like that's how my mind works, I can't actually use like say what people say on social media as a guide to like what I'll write. And it's this like sense of, personal responsibility is like a huge word. But at least like personally, I've never felt that like, and like this like might sound like I'm putting it down a bit, but I've never felt that like my writing is like important. You know, it's like some of it is like fun and all that, and it can be funny and it can be sad, whatever. But like I've never felt that like it actually like does anything. It's like, oh, someone read this essay or someone read this story and like they might feel like happy, they might feel sad, and because I've never felt like it does anything, it becomes like a question of like, you can't actually feel responsible for something that doesn't do anything, you know? It's just words, you know? And I feel sad about that because I read like all these things about like how the Kenyan government is terrible and like they're stealing things, and like I also like do feel that like also that writing does nothing. But for me it's always that like I'm not convinced people actually care about writing.
Could you ask the question again?
How do you feel about audiences' reactions? Does it influence you? And also, what personal responsibility do you take for your writing?
I think I'm also aware that I'm just a very sensitive person. So So yes, it doesn't influence my choice of what I'm going to write. In fact, I think I always lean away from suggestions of what I should write. It's almost like, if you want me to write something, don't tell me. Like, find some other way, because I'm just going to go the other way. So in that sense, yeah, I've answered that part of the question. And then about personal responsibility, I don't think I'm writing anything that's, at least I don't intentionally try to harm people. And as long as I'm not intentionally doing that, and I'm also cognizant of the fact that somebody might call me out, and hopefully I'll be open enough to listen and then not repeat the same mistake. That's all I can do.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a two-way interaction with my audience. Often I've had to pick ideas from them, especially now I'm having like a blog. And if you're active on social media, sometimes you write a post and then someone comes, writes a comment that is even funnier, more interesting, and it can even birth even a better piece from that. But you have to be very selective, because ordinarily once you have like a good following on social media, people will be coming with different, oh, Andika, write about this, write about this, write about this. But you can't pick everything. So you have to be very selective on what you pick. As for the responsibility that we have to our audience or to our readers, honestly, like Carey, I never take myself too seriously. But sometimes I write something as a joke, then I come back and I find like it has gone viral, and maybe people are insulting me, and I'm like, it wasn't supposed to be this serious. And twice or thrice I've had to pull down a post because it offended certain sensibilities, and we just charge that to a bad day in office, because most of the time, after a while, you begin to understand what clicks with people. Around 2020, 2021, I had a problem with my female audience. What I did now, I had to start issuing disclaimer. My pieces had to get longer so that I could explain myself. And I don't have to come back to the comment section to start justifying what I was doing, you know. So there is a responsibility that you do have to our readers or to our audience. But sometimes we just wish that they didn't take us too seriously.
And I suppose it ties into the question about, you know, do people conflate you with your work, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's, I think I should take that. I'm a victim of that, because there are things that I write because that is Silas who wants to say that. And there are things that I write as a Nairobi man. Like in my book, Man About Town, in as much as like it's very autobiographical, but it was me being a bachelor, being a Nairobian, and trying to be like a gadfly, like trying to be like a fly on the wall, just observing and reporting what people are doing in real time. So the hope that whoever's reading that book, maybe 50 years from now, is to think about Nairobi in the 2010s, like that's how Nairobi looked like, especially the social scene, the nightclub, the nightlife, the dating scene. I sort of like wanted to be like a representation of that, but sometimes people assume that everything you're writing about is about yourself. So, and I'm constantly begging people that sometimes learn to separate the writer from their work. If someone is a serial killer in a movie, it doesn't mean that they are a serial killer in real life. So there is that need for readers to be discerning and know that here the writer is maybe being sarcastic, the writer is being serious, the writer is being childish, you know. Like the reader also has to have that sense of like discernment. Yeah.
Do you find that, Lutivini? You've borrowed a lot from your own experiences. Are you writing about yourself, though?
I mean, I would say, I think it's not your audience's fault, but it's like we are always evolving, and I don't owe loyalty to my old self. I have to keep moving forward. So sometimes, yeah, a lot of my work is very personal. So that's who I was in that moment. But it becomes a real challenge when someone meets you later and you're like, yes, sincerely, that is what I thought then. But 5 years later, I think differently. But to be honest, I haven't had that kind of thing where people project what they read on me. I just haven't had that experience.
A lot of yours is nonfiction, but do you experience that as well?
I guess like Lutivini, like not really, because like I very rarely appear in the things I write. So it's like there's nothing to like say that like this is like Carey writing about himself. So yeah, I also like
There's the parties, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe it's like people assume that like I have interest in like the things I write about. But that's true because like I wrote about Mtura. I'm very interested in Mtura, you know? It's like, that's like one of my core interests. But if it's like, yeah, I personally rarely appear as myself. I'm just like there as like a sort of like a narrator, but like me as myself, I'm rarely there in my stories. Yeah.
So I will collapse these last two. So one is about how much of your work is online and how ephemeral it is and how you feel about that. And also, have you encountered, experienced plagiarism and how did you react to it?
I do understand how short-lived Facebook is. And I always tell my friends that if I quit Facebook today, in another 2 years, I'll be completely forgotten. I'm permanently aware of that, and that's why, for example, I've collected all my memos and I've put them into a book, so that in the future, if Facebook disappears, at least there'll be a book for that. I've also collected some of the pieces that got the most likes, the highest number of comments, and I intend also to collect them into a book. And even in my book, Man About Town, the second part of it is actually a collection of Facebook stories. The first part, the original essays, and the second part is a collection of old stories from Facebook and other online platforms, from my blogs and all that. So I also I can tell Lutivini and Carey that it's also good to collect your work so that you can have it maybe in your email or somewhere, so that you can always circulate it in the future, because you never know. I do encounter stuff like very good essays from the 70s, from the 60s, and you're like, okay, this was really fresh thinking. And there is to hope that what you're writing maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it will make sense to someone, if at all they'll be reading around that time. As for plagiarism, that happens a lot, especially with my memos sometimes. Like when I wrote a reaction to Carey's piece on Googie, the stuff about divorce, there's a guy who picked my memo from Facebook and ran it on his Twitter, and he ran away with it, and everyone was calling out, because in Kenya, those who read me especially, they know my voice, they know how I write, they know my style. They tried to call out the man, and the man stubbornly just refused to even send an apology or anything, but it's one of the occupational hazards, because someone just copies the memo and then they circulate on WhatsApp, because that's when our stuff really goes viral, and then it goes back, and then it comes back to you, but Silas, is this your work? And they're like, oh yeah, it's my work, but you say because it's like the gospel and you want to share it with everyone, it's good if it can be read by as many people as possible. They would wish to be credited for that, but it doesn't happen that way. So for popular writers online, their works are constantly being plagiarized by these bloggers that want people to read them, by online sites like Tuko. Tuko have this annoying thing that you can just write about eating omena in town, and they'll say, "Aye, Nairobi writer goes to eat omena." So you have to deal with it every day. So it's part of the professional hazards of being online. Yeah.
I don't worry too much about plagiarism. I think Silas has explained it well. And then the funny thing, I think, when I worked in publishing, the place I was working didn't have as many publications and such. But I remember going for a publishers meeting, and they were saying how, partly because we're not publishing as many books, at least then, the only way you knew someone's work was popular is if it was pirated. So then at the time, I think there was an author whose books were being pirated in Tanzania, in Uganda, and they were just like, so they're not actually selling the copies here, but then the piracy is so high, it's an indicator, okay, we need to republish this person. And so, anyway, that's just an aside. What was the second part? See, I'm a storyteller, I get carried away. So I have had the experience of a publication that published a short story of mine that I really liked, that I was very happy with, and then it just disappeared from the internet. Like the literary magazine folded, and they didn't even announce, they just disappeared. And yeah, it was upsetting, and it's very upsetting when that happens. And so it's like you're saying, oh, I was published here, but no one can find it. So, but the only thing you can do then is, you have the work saved already, and then you can republish it, although there are fewer opportunities to republish it unless it's in a book, when it's already been online once before. I will say, though, that it's a medium that exists now, and it's a medium through which I have been able to share most of my work. So it seems like defeatist to not use it while it's there, but also to keep a backup of what's there, and hopefully publish a book in the future.
Yeah, like Lutivini, I don't worry about plagiarism, since Silas is the popular writer, so as we don't suffer that problem. It's really sad how first of all, ephemerality is a really good word, but it's really sad how all these publications, they have a shelf life. And it's the notion is to think of online platforms as being more easily, the chances of them going under is higher. And of course, social media, of course, is much higher, right? So it becomes my space was there and existed, and then stopped existing, and then it's Facebook might be there now and then that might not exist, and then Twitter or whatever. But I think about there's this idea that print is more permanent, but I don't think it's more permanent, because think about something like transition, which was the biggest thing in Africa in the 1960s, right? And it was all these intellectual circles in Kampala, Nairobi, and Ibadan, whoever were talking about transition and writing for transition, doing all stuff on transition. And after Idi Amin took over, transition died, right? And you wouldn't have any of these copies of transition. You wouldn't be able to read transition at all if Harvard hadn't taken it over and put all the material online. It's so maybe it being in print in the first place meant it that there would be an archive, but it being online right now is what means that people are able to read it, right? So is this even if it's print, you think about all these people who write so you have someone Ngugi, who becomes a big writer and is well renowned and everybody knows who the hell he is, right? But then someone like John Nagenda, who was maybe a similar literary writer or even better, his books, he had physical books, but they're all out of print, right? And if you were to search for him, you can't read him anywhere, because all of those books, they were in print and then they're out of print. So it's this idea that sometimes online stuff can disappear, but also print disappears. There's a Kenyan poet called Clifton Gashago, who is a really good poet, right? He has a collection called Bandman in Kilifi. Now, Bandman in Kilifi, you can't find it anywhere, because it was never published. Most of those poems have never appeared online, but it was published in print. And it's been out of print for years and years and years and years, and the publisher seems to have no interest in issuing new copies. So you'd think that it being print would help Clifton, but it doesn't really, because this means that his book is not available anywhere. But then because it was published in print, it means that the publisher has copyright, so you can publish something else, and it's this, so it's something that stresses me, because it's not just online but also print, that all these publications or books that are published, there's a point when they're going to disappear. And frankly, if you're not famous enough that people hear, that would be it for you, and that would be it for your writing,
Thank you so much. I hope that doesn't feel too bleak. There is lots of writing out there, both from the people who we have on the panel here and all the influences they've talked about the industry, and about just how writing itself will continue to evolve. Thank you all so much for your thoughts and for your insights. Do get copies of DRR, do get copies of Silas's books, do follow them on social media. As we've learned, digital writing and digital publication is a big thing. And hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you this morning.